I need to check your bag.
Go ahead.
All right. Open. Nothing.
Security footage captured everything that happened that Wednesday morning at 6:47 a.m. A black woman in her late 40s walked through the airport terminal, well-dressed and poised, rolling a small suitcase behind her. She had on a navy blazer, a cream-colored blouse, and moved with understated confidence. Officer Greg Palmer noticed her from across the way, and his expression shifted. He began moving toward her deliberately, his hand already reaching toward his belt. This officer had no idea he'd just committed the biggest blunder of his career. A mistake that would strip him of everything he'd built and reveal a troubling pattern that had stayed hidden far too long. Before we go any further, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country or city down in the comments, and if this is your first time here, make sure to hit that subscribe button. This story is about to get even more intense, and you definitely don't want to miss what comes next. Monica Freeman had served as a judge for 8 years. Prior to that, she'd worked 12 years as a prosecutor, locking up some of the state's most dangerous criminals. She'd witnessed everything. Killers, thieves, corrupt politicians, and every type of liar imaginable. She understood the law completely. Her grasp of her rights exceeded that of most attorneys, and she certainly recognized when those rights were being trampled. That particular morning, she was headed to a conference in another state. She had a presentation scheduled about equity in the criminal justice system. The irony of what was about to unfold wouldn't be missed by anyone who later heard what happened to her. Officer Palmer intercepted her near Gate 14. Without properly identifying himself or providing any explanation, he ordered her to halt. Monica complied, puzzled but composed. She inquired whether something was amiss. He offered no real response. Instead, he questioned where she was headed. She informed him she was boarding a flight, just like everyone else at the airport. He requested her ticket. She retrieved her phone and displayed her digital boarding pass. He gave it barely a glance. Then he demanded her identification. Monica reached into her purse and presented her driver's license. He examined it extensively, far longer than needed. He questioned where she'd come from. She explained she'd just arrived at the airport from her residence. He asked where that residence was located. She answered courteously, though she was beginning to grasp what was unfolding. All around them, other travelers moved through freely. A young white guy in sweatpants and a hoodie walked right past the officer without drawing a second look. An elderly white woman struggling with 3 oversized bags went by, and the officer neither helped nor questioned her. Monica observed all of this. She trained herself to catch everything. It came with the territory of her profession. Officer Palmer questioned what Monica did for a living. This inquiry served no legitimate security function, and she understood that, yet she responded anyway. She mentioned simply that she worked in law. He pressed for specifics about what type of law. She indicated criminal law. He made an expression suggesting disbelief. He instructed her to step to the side because he needed to inspect her bag. Monica understood that random bag inspections occurred at airports. Except this wasn't random. She was being singled out, and it grew more transparent with every passing moment. Still, she had nothing to conceal, so she moved aside with him. Better to cooperate and record everything than provide him any justification to make things worse. He unzipped her small suitcase right there in the terminal. He removed her clothing item by item, her undergarments, her sleepwear, her toiletries. He spread them across a nearby bench where passing travelers could view everything. Other passengers gawked. Some appeared sympathetic. Others quickly averted their eyes, uncomfortable on her behalf. Monica remained standing with her hands folded before her, her expression serene, but internally she was seething. Quick question for everyone watching. Have you or someone close to you ever gone through something similar? Type yes if you have. He rifled through her toiletry bag, uncapping her makeup, unscrewing tops from her miniature lotion and perfume bottles. He pressed her toothpaste tube. He was being methodical in a manner that seemed vindictive, as if attempting to embarrass her. And perhaps he was. Perhaps that was the entire objective. He discovered nothing, naturally. No weapons, no prohibited substances, nothing even remotely questionable. Just the ordinary possessions of a professional woman on a 3-day work trip. But Officer Palmer wasn't finished. He announced he needed to examine her purse. She handed it over. He emptied the contents onto the bench alongside her clothing. Her wallet, her keys, her phone charger, her cosmetics bag, a book she was currently reading, some receipts, a pack of gum, hand sanitizer, and a small notebook she kept for work notes. He picked up the notebook and began leafing through it. This violated another boundary. Her work notes potentially contained confidential material. She stated firmly yet politely that the notebook held privileged legal information and he possessed no authority to examine it. He disregarded her. He continued flipping through pages, taking his sweet time. Monica pulled out her phone and began filming. The instant she lifted the phone, Officer Palmer's entire demeanor transformed. He ordered her to lower the phone. She stated calmly that she possessed the right to film a public official executing their duties in a public area. He moved closer, encroaching on her personal space. He repeated his command to put away the phone. She refused to comply. She continued recording. This is when his partner, Officer Linda Chavez, approached. Officer Chavez inquired about the situation. Palmer claimed he was performing a routine security screening. Chavez glanced at the bench covered with Monica's personal items, looked at Monica with her phone raised, and appeared to sense something wasn't right here. She questioned Palmer about why he'd chosen this specific passenger for screening. He claimed it was random. Chavez surveyed all the other passengers who weren't being screened and lifted an eyebrow but remained silent. Monica addressed Officer Chavez directly. She stated she was experiencing racial profiling and harassment. She explained she'd accommodated every demand, presented her identification and boarding pass, permitted her luggage to be searched, and nothing suspicious had turned up. She requested Officer Palmer's badge number and his supervisor's name. She delivered all this in a steady, articulate voice, the voice she employed in her courtroom when preparing to issue a ruling that would alter someone's existence. Officer Palmer didn't appreciate this. He accused her of being disruptive. She wasn't being disruptive. She stood motionless, spoke at a normal volume, and simply stood up for herself. But Palmer appeared to require a pretext. He warned her that unless she settled down, he'd have her escorted from the airport. She responded that she was entirely calm and requested his badge number again. He reached for her arm. This became his second biggest blunder of the day, right after choosing to target her initially. The moment his hand contacted her arm, Monica explicitly stated she didn't consent to physical contact and that she wasn't under arrest. She demanded to know on what basis he was detaining her. He claimed she was being held for suspicious conduct. She asked him to identify what conduct appeared suspicious. He couldn't provide a coherent answer. Officer Chavez appeared increasingly uneasy. She quietly proposed to Palmer that perhaps they should summon a supervisor. Palmer gave her an irritated look. He'd gone too far down this path now, too invested in the direction he'd chosen. He informed Monica she needed to accompany him to the security office for further screening. Monica questioned whether she was under arrest. He said no. She asked whether she was free to leave. He said no. She noted he couldn't have it both ways. A small crowd had formed by now. People were observing, some filming with their own phones. Airport incidents like this had a tendency to draw attention. Palmer seemed to notice this and didn't like it. He elevated his voice and instructed everyone to keep moving. Most people stayed put. They sensed something improper was taking place, and their presence might shield this woman from whatever this officer intended to do. Monica missed her flight, obviously, by the time Palmer finally relented and released her. When a supervisor eventually showed up and rapidly evaluated the situation, her flight had already taken off. The supervisor, a weary-looking man in his 50s, apologized to Monica. He offered assistance with rebooking, but Monica had no interest in his apologies. She requested his name and employee number. She requested Palmer's complete information. She requested contact details for the Airport Police Department's Internal Affairs Division and their Civilian Oversight Board. She requested the names and contact information of every witness who'd stopped to observe. The supervisor grew less apologetic and more guarded. He insisted Palmer had simply been performing his duties. Monica smiled for the first time since this entire ordeal began, but it wasn't a warm smile. She mentioned she anticipated explaining in federal court precisely what she thought about how Officer Palmer performed his duties. She didn't reveal she was a judge. Not yet. She wanted to observe how they'd handle a complaint from someone they presumed was merely an ordinary citizen without influence. She wanted to see whether they'd treat her seriously, investigate thoroughly, and hold Palmer responsible, or whether they'd close ranks and shield their own. She had a fairly strong hunch which it would be. What's your take on what happened after she filed the complaint? You think they handled it properly? Monica rescheduled her flight for later that afternoon. She found a secluded corner of the airport and invested the following 2 hours documenting everything that had occurred, every detail she could recall, with exact times based on her phone's timestamp from when she'd started recording. She noted down the names and numbers she'd gathered. She uploaded her video recording to cloud storage, then forwarded it to herself at 3 separate email addresses. She understood how evidence could mysteriously vanish. When she reached her conference that evening, she delivered her speech as scheduled, but now she possessed a recent personal illustration to incorporate into her discussion about injustice within the system. The audience was stunned. Multiple attorneys came up to her afterward and volunteered their assistance. She appreciated their offers but indicated she had something different in mind. Back home the next week, Monica submitted a formal complaint with the airport police department. She attached her written account, her video, and contact information for 17 witnesses who'd shared their details with her. She forwarded copies to local news outlets, the State Aviation Authority, and the Federal Department of Transportation. She also mailed a copy to the largest civil rights law firm in the state, alongside a letter indicating her interest in legal action. The police department's reply arrived 3 weeks later. It was a standard form letter acknowledging her complaint and notifying her that the issue had been investigated and handled internally. No specifics, no admission of fault, no explanation of what handled internally entailed. The letter bore the signature of someone in human resources whose name she didn't recognize. This was precisely what Monica had anticipated, and this was when she disclosed who she was. She convened a press conference. She donned her judge's robe. She sat at a table with her attorney beside her, a formidable civil rights lawyer named Rebecca Okonkwo, who'd secured millions in compensation from police departments nationwide. Monica recounted her story thoroughly. She screened segments of her video. Then she announced she was initiating a federal lawsuit against Officer Greg Palmer, Officer Linda Chavez for her failure to intervene, the supervisor for his insufficient response, and the airport police department for perpetuating a culture that permitted racial profiling to thrive. The story detonated. Local news outlets grabbed it first, then regional, then national. A judge had been profiled and degraded at an airport. The video documented everything. It was clear, well illuminated, and incriminating. There was no method to spin this, no way to assert it was misrepresented. The footage conveyed the truth itself. Officer Palmer's background emerged rapidly after that. Monica's legal team subpoenaed his employment file. It revealed he had 7 prior complaints for racial profiling. 7, all from black and brown travelers. All dismissed, or resulting in minimal discipline like a written reprimand. One complaint had originated from a black military officer in uniform returning from deployment. Another from a black physician who'd been traveling to conduct emergency surgery. Palmer had singled them all out, and the department had shielded him every single time. The airport police department issued a statement claiming they regarded the allegations seriously and were performing a comprehensive review. They assigned Palmer to administrative leave with compensation. This only intensified public anger. Why was he receiving a paid break while the judge he'd humiliated had to retain lawyers and relive her ordeal? Additional victims began stepping forward. Once the news spread, people who'd been stopped and searched by Palmer without justification discovered their voices. The legal team gathered statements from 43 people over the subsequent 2 months, 43 individuals who described identical patterns. Palmer would notice a black or brown person, especially those who appeared well-dressed or prosperous, and single them out for searches. It seemed like he couldn't tolerate seeing people of color who were successful, like he needed to diminish them, remind them he held authority over them. One woman recounted how Palmer had caused her to miss her father's funeral. Another explained how he detained her so extensively that she missed a job interview she'd prepared for over months. A college student stated Palmer had searched his bag and made derogatory remarks about whether his designer clothing was authentic or counterfeit, suggesting he must have stolen them. The accounts continued endlessly. The lawsuit progressed. The airport police department attempted dismissal. The judge presiding over the case, not Monica, obviously, but a federal judge declined. Discovery commenced. Monica's legal team demanded documents, emails, training materials, and complaint records. They deposed Palmer, who performed terribly on the witness stand. He came across as defensive, combative, and unable to supply adequate explanations for why he'd stopped Monica and inspected her belongings so exhaustively. His attorney attempted to contend that Palmer had been adhering to his training and instincts. Monica's attorney requested he clarify what specific conduct Monica had displayed that warranted such examination. Palmer claimed she appeared anxious. The attorney played the video, which depicted Monica looking entirely composed. Palmer mentioned she was traveling with limited luggage, which seemed suspicious. The attorney highlighted that she was embarking on a 3-day trip, and her luggage matched that time frame appropriately. Palmer referenced something about her itinerary being suspicious. The attorney observed that she was flying from her home city to a major metropolitan center for a documented legal conference. Nothing about any aspect was suspicious. What's your opinion? Do you think Palmer genuinely believed he'd done nothing inappropriate, or did he know precisely what he was doing? The trial occurred 11 months following the initial incident. It spanned 8 days. The courtroom reached capacity every single day. News cameras assembled outside. Monica testified for 4 hours. She remained poised, thorough, and believable. She didn't embellish or theatricalize. She simply conveyed the truth about what transpired and how it affected her. She discussed the humiliation of having her underwear displayed on a bench in public view, the invasion of having her personal belongings dumped out and examined, the apprehension when Palmer seized her arm, uncertain how far he'd escalate things, the exasperation of missing her flight and almost missing her speaking engagement, and the profound hurt of being treated like a criminal in her own nation, simply due to her skin color. The witnesses testified sequentially. They described their interactions with Palmer. The pattern was irrefutable. The jury listened to airport employees who mentioned they'd observed Palmer's conduct but hadn't reported it because they feared reprisal. They heard from a former airport police officer who'd resigned specifically because he was revolted by the department's acceptance of racial profiling. An authority on implicit bias and police conduct testified about how Palmer's actions matched the textbook pattern of racial profiling. A statistician demonstrated that Palmer had searched black passengers at a rate 17 times greater than white passengers, despite discovering contraband at identical low rates across all racial categories. This established his targeting of black travelers wasn't effective security practice. It was simply racism. Palmer's defense attempted to portray him as a committed officer performing a challenging job. They presented character witnesses who testified he was a good person, but it was impossible to reconcile their descriptions with the evidence. Good people don't humiliate innocent individuals. Good people don't disregard 7 complaints and perpetuate the same conduct. Good people don't grab a woman's arm when she courteously requests a badge number. Officer Chavez testified that she'd felt troubled during the incident, but didn't know how to respond. She mentioned she'd suggested summoning a supervisor, but Palmer had declined. She conceded she should have done more to prevent what was unfolding. Her testimony actually benefited Monica's case because it demonstrated that even Palmer's own partner recognized something was improper. The supervisor who'd finally stepped in attempted to justify the department's complaint procedures. Monica's attorney questioned why a judge's complaint had received merely a form letter reply. He had no adequate answer. The attorney asked why Palmer had been permitted to keep working despite 7 previous complaints. He muttered something about progressive discipline and due process. The attorney questioned whether the department would have shown such patience with 7 complaints against a black officer. The supervisor offered no response. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned with a verdict favoring Monica on absolutely every count. They determined that Palmer had infringed her civil rights through racial profiling and unlawful detention. They determined that Chavez had failed in her obligation to intervene. They determined that the supervisor had been negligent in his handling. And most significantly, they determined that the airport police department had sustained policies and a culture that enabled racial profiling to persist unchallenged. The damages award astonished everyone. The jury granted Monica $200,000 in compensatory damages for her suffering and distress. Then they awarded her $4.8 million in punitive damages intended to punish the defendants and discourage future wrongdoing. The total reached $5 million. $5 million for a security encounter that lasted roughly 40 minutes. But it was never truly about the financial compensation. It was about sending a message. The airport police department appealed, naturally. They argued the punitive damages were unreasonable. The appellate court disagreed. The judges on the appellate panel observed that the department had disregarded 7 prior complaints about the identical officer, establishing a pattern of intentional indifference to constitutional protections. The damages were confirmed in full. But the financial settlement was merely the start of the consequences. The real karma went far deeper. Officer Greg Palmer was terminated 3 days following the verdict. His police certification was stripped, meaning he could never serve in law enforcement again. He was 47 years old and had devoted his entire adult life to being a cop. Now he'd need to discover a new profession, and he'd need to explain to every prospective employer why he'd been fired and why his image had been broadcast across the news. Officer Chavez was suspended for 6 months without compensation and demoted. She ultimately left the force, and last anyone knew, she was employed in private security, earning reduced wages and living with the awareness that she'd failed to act correctly when it counted. The supervisor retired sooner than intended, discreetly and without the ceremony typically afforded to long-serving employees. His reputation was destroyed. His pension remained secure, but his legacy was permanently connected to his failure to confront Palmer's evident pattern of misconduct. The entire airport police department was positioned under federal supervision. A consent decree mandated them to establish new training on racial prejudice, create an authentic complaint investigation system with civilian monitoring, and submit to oversight by an independent authority for 5 years. Every racial profiling complaint would now be examined by external parties, and the outcomes would be publicized. 17 officers were investigated based on details that surfaced during Monica's trial. 8 of them were dismissed. 4 were suspended. The remainder received formal discipline that entered their permanent records. The department's leadership was overhauled. The chief retired. 2 deputy chiefs were demoted or reassigned. But Monica still had more to do. She utilized her portion of the settlement to create a legal fund specifically for victims of airport racial profiling. The fund supplied free legal representation to anyone who felt they'd been targeted due to their race. Within the first year, the fund accepted 32 cases. 11 resulted in settlements. 4 proceeded to trial, and all 4 prevailed. The fund also advocated for legislative reform. Monica testified before her state legislature about the necessity for improved oversight of airport security staff. She addressed congressional committees about the issue at the federal level. Legislation was modified, policies were revised, training was enhanced at least in certain jurisdictions. Palmer attempted to countersue Monica, alleging she'd defamed him. His lawsuit was dismissed almost instantly. Truth constitutes an absolute defense against defamation, and everything Monica stated about him was demonstrably accurate. His attorney likely understood the lawsuit would fail but filed it regardless, perhaps hoping to intimidate her or exhaust her resources. It accomplished neither. It simply made Palmer appear even worse. 3 years following the incident, Monica campaigned for a position on her state's Supreme Court. During the campaign, she spoke candidly about what had occurred to her at the airport. She utilized it as an illustration of why the courts required judges who comprehended injustice from personal experience, not merely legal theory. She won the election by a substantial margin. She became Justice Freeman, one of 9 individuals with authority to interpret law for millions of citizens. Meanwhile, Palmer's life headed in the reverse direction. He moved between jobs, nothing permanent. He attempted to avoid the public spotlight, but the internet never forgets. His name was forever associated with that airport video. Prospective employers would always discover it. His children faced harassment at school because of what their father had done. His marriage disintegrated under the pressure. These weren't outcomes Monica wished upon him, but they were the natural results of his decisions. The airport installed a memorial in the terminal where Monica had been detained. Not precisely a memorial, more like a commemorative plaque. It recognized what had transpired there and pledged the airport to treating all travelers with dignity and respect. Some people considered it performative. Perhaps it was. But it also meant that thousands of travelers daily walked past a reminder that racial profiling was genuine, inappropriate, and wouldn't be accepted. Would you have done what Monica did, or would you have simply let it go and continued on? 5 years following the incident, Monica participated in an interview with a national magazine. She was questioned whether she'd forgiven Officer Palmer. She explained forgiveness was a complex matter. She didn't harbor hatred toward him. She didn't invest her time dwelling on him. But she also didn't feel compelled to excuse him from accountability for what he'd done to her and innumerable others. She mentioned she hoped he'd gained insight and evolved into a better person, but that wasn't her responsibility. Her responsibility was ensuring it didn't happen to the next individual. She was questioned whether the lawsuit and everything that ensued had been worthwhile. She said unquestionably. Not because of the financial award, which she'd mostly donated to the legal fund and various civil rights organizations, but because confronting injustice was always worthwhile, even when it was difficult, even when it was draining, even when people advised her to simply forget it and move forward. She was asked what guidance she'd offer to others who encountered racial profiling or police misconduct. She advised documenting everything. Record if you can do so safely. Obtain witness names and contact details. Document every detail while it's recent. Submit complaints through every accessible avenue. Don't presume the system will function properly, but don't allow that to prevent you from attempting. Locate capable attorneys who support your cause. And remember that you're not battling solely for yourself, but for everyone who follows after you. The airport where everything unfolded is different now, at least somewhat. Officers exercise more caution. Complaints receive more serious consideration. The culture transformed, driven by federal supervision and the apprehension of another costly lawsuit. It's not flawless. Nowhere is flawless, but it's improved from what it was. And that transformation occurred because one woman declined to accept being treated as subhuman. Monica still travels frequently for her duties on the Supreme Court. She still passes through airports. Occasionally she encounters security officers who recognize her. Most glance away rapidly, embarrassed. A few have approached her to apologize on behalf of their field. She receives these apologies graciously, though she recognizes one decent officer doesn't eliminate the systemic problems. And sometimes when she's moving through an airport terminal, she observes a young black woman or man being selected for additional screening. When circumstances permit, when it appears suitable, she pauses. She observes. She allows the officers to understand someone is monitoring, and if circumstances seem improper, she's unafraid to pose questions or retrieve her phone. She understands from experience how significant a difference it creates when someone witnesses, when someone cares, when someone refuses to simply pass by. Officer Greg Palmer made a decision that Wednesday morning at 6:47 a.m. He noticed a successful black woman and concluded she needed to be diminished. He assumed he possessed the power, and she possessed none. He believed he could humiliate her and proceed with his day without consequences, exactly as he'd done to so many others before. He was mistaken, and that error cost him everything while imparting a lesson that resonated far beyond one airport terminal. Justice isn't always rapid, and it's not always guaranteed. But sometimes when courageous people pursue it, justice does arrive, and that's precisely what transpired here. Thanks for staying with this story until the conclusion. If you discovered something valuable or this changed your perspective on anything, drop a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one.